I'd like to introduce Jeff Clark. Jeff Clark is the Director of Software Engineering at Audyssey. So, Jeff, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do and what does that fancy title mean and all that type of thing?
I'm Director of Software Engineering, but I wear many hats. Predominantly, this has meant that I oversee software development for the PC and mobile applications that Audyssey produces, as well as technology libraries that other people build applications around. I also get deep and elbow deep into the signal processing. So there are elements of the signal processing that are things that I've developed personally and technologies that I've developed. So though I'm mostly a software engineer, I kind of do a little bit of everything.
There's multiple versions of Audyssey that we utilize, depending on the level of receiver you purchase, whether it's Denon or Marantz. And as you move up the line, you get a bigger brain, and with a bigger brain, you get more capabilities, more filters for the equalization, sub EQ, as well as low frequency containment. Now, a big tip is people go, well, how do I optimize my Audyssey? And I want more adjustability. And that's where the Audyssey app comes in. Jim is a big proponent of this app. That's one of the first things when I joined the company that he made me go out and get was this app on my tablets, on my phone, because this is how we EQ and set up Audyssey in our systems whenever we travel and we do demonstrations. And that is because there's a certain amount of brain power built into the receiver. It's pretty darn smart, but your phone is smarter, especially if the phone can dedicate most of its processing to running this app to do the calculations. So the premise is you plug in the microphone into the receiver takes the measurements, sends the data to the application. Your mobile device, which is smarter than the computers used to send a man to the moon, does the calculations and sends the final settings and your final selections back to the receiver. And it makes a big difference. And it's available on the Android store as well as the Apple store. So what I have here is I have an iPad, and I actually ran a couple of Audyssey on my iPad. And I ran these last night because I ran the original Audyssey application using my smartphone. So I have another 4 or 5 app settings in this phone, but I wanted to run some on this iPad so you guys could see it. And I ran 2 of the ones that I commonly have in my room. So in my room, I have a large 75-inch TV that I use during the day, and I have big glass sliding doors on one side of the room. So that has an effect on the acoustics in the space. So if you look, there's one that is labeled flat panel day. The next one is at night, I drop my projection screen and I close my heavy blackout curtains. Well, that impacts the sound of the room. So I have one called FPJ night. So let's go in and let's pick one. So let's go into flat panel day. So what happens here is one of the big things that people always bring up is about Audyssey is they wish that they had more adjustments, more ways to adjust the system. And by utilizing this app, you get a tremendous amount of adjustments and flexibility for 20 bucks. Come on. And you can utilize this for not only for multiple systems. Once this is on your smart device, the second you have any Denon or Marantz receiver on the network can be controlled or utilized using this application. So the first thing, it'll let you know the size of the speakers that are detected. Now, sometimes you may think your speaker is full range, and Audyssey will say no, 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 and that is based on how that speaker actually reacts in the room, not the specs on the box, what it sounds like in your space. The next thing that I love about it is after the corrections are done, I get to see a before and after. And you can see that in my room, the differences are dramatic after I got done running running this MultEQ app on my phone, and you could see how much of a difference is. Now, one thing you'll notice, and we'll talk about it, if you look at my front speakers, my front left and right, you can see how flat it is all the way through the mid-range. but wait a minute, when I look at my center, there's this little dip, and we'll talk about that. That's called mid-range compensation, and we'll talk about what the benefits are about that later. But I can go in here and I can look at all of my individual speakers. As a customer, it lets me know exactly how much Audyssey is helping me. And if I am a dealer or a salesperson, it allows me to show the customer how much Audyssey is helping them. So there's a win-win for everyone. So I can go in here and I can even look at all of my different speakers, and I continue, even if I can even look at my subwoofers, and you can see how much it smoothed out the bass in my room. That is amazing, the difference between those two. Dave Duffy, he's asking about, when I showed you the red and green before and after. One is he's wondering, okay, so he says actual versus the actual final response versus the predicted. So he's saying, is the red one the prediction of what things are going to be like, or is it the actual what things are going to be like?
So there's sometimes some like misunderstanding, or we're not. What we do is we take all of these measurements that you've done and we aggregate them together in a way that we feel best represents the room and what the frequency response is and what needs to be corrected. So each position has still got its own frequency response, and they're still going to end up a little different from each other. That's just the physics of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
However, what we are showing is if you went and measured all of those positions again,
Mm-hmm.
the correction applied, and combined them the same way that we combined them to come up with the overall representative response, then that overall representative response will be the target curve. And these are experiments that we've done and not even experiments. These are part of our test patterns that we do on the software to make sure it's working correctly. We use a laser alignment system to place the microphone exactly to a quarter of an inch where the microphone was before. So we'll move it around to the 8 positions. We'll apply the correction. We'll use a second system to measure through the filters, move the microphone through those 8 positions again. You will see that curve.
Okay, so basically what you're looking at here is this is what based on how many tools I have in my toolbox, this is what I know I can probably do with equalization. And you can kind of see that. If you look at the surround left on here, you'll notice that it's pretty smooth through like that 250 type thing, about 250. If I go to my my big Wilsons, there's a little dip there that it says I can fix most of that, but I can't fix all of that. So this is kind of so it is, while it is predictive, it's based on, I know how much capability and equalization and gain I have to do this. And this is what I think you're going to end up with as a final result. So it's kind of like a fine balance.
We can't put infinite power into something that is a really deep notch. And even if we could, it wouldn't necessarily fill it in if it's a true null. So we fill it in as best as possible without risking overtaxing amplifiers, digital clipping. All of these things have to come into play in the EQ design.
Now, there's a couple of things you can do. There's the first thing it asks you also is the target sound options. And right here, you'll see that it has a high frequency roll off options 1 and 2. So Jeff, why would somebody want to roll off their high frequencies? People a lot of times think they want flat frequency response. Why would you want to roll it off?
Yeah, the high frequency roll offs are actually kind of designed around oriented towards theater. The difference in the theater versus the difference in listening at home is that at home you typically have a more reverberant space, and that allows those high frequencies to build up in a way that EQ doesn't totally detect and deal with. So in that case, you want some high frequency roll off. And if you have a more reverberant room or larger room, that's where you might want a little more roll off. So that's where we include the high frequency roll off 2. It is worth noting that when you do this calibration, you still have a flat curve that is transferred to the AVR
Mhm,
in a lot of the cases, I believe in most of the models, where
mhm.
it will work in conjunction with other theater compensation EQ technologies.
Exactly. And you also have, once it's done, they have a reference, they have a flat, and then they have a, so you can actually go into the receiver and choose once this is loaded, do I want to use a perfectly flat one or a roll, or it's one that's kind of this reference, this roll off one. So you could choose that. Now, a lot of times people think flat response is the best response. Coming back from the car audio world and actually being with a speaker company, flat does not sound good. Most people think they want flat. No, you want smooth. You don't want jaggedy frequency response. You want smooth frequency response. But people actually prefer it to be like this, where the bass is boosted slightly over the high frequencies, because no one can, a lot of times a little bit more bass is just sounds better. It sounds warmer. So they actually, well, they want it to be smooth, but they don't want it to be completely flat. So most speakers are engineered that way, and people prefer it. If you're a car stereo person and you go through all of the car stereo competitions for quality, they checked smoothness, but they wanted a slope where where it went from high, the bass was a little bit higher than the highs, and it sounds better, and it feels more natural, and you will prefer it. So flat is not always perfect. You think flat is, but it's not the end all be all.
This
Okay.
is a good point to
Um,
talk about that mid-range compensation too, which is
exactly. So let's
um,
talk about that. So we
not
have this mid-range compensation where I actually have, if you look here, I have the mid-range compensation setting, which right here, if I turn that on, you notice I have the center turned on right now. If I go and I hit front speakers right here, turn on the front, and then I go back to room correction results, you'll see that now my front speaker has that little dip in it. And people see that because that's the default. And they go, why is there a dip here? Shouldn't it be flat? Why? So Jeff, can you talk about what this mid-range compensation is for?
yeah, this is an adjustment that we found works well for the majority of speakers. If it doesn't work out well for your ears, you can turn it off. But what we find is that a lot of speaker manufacturers even build this into the power response of the speaker. And what it is the transition from a tweeter to a mid-range or woofer, which usually happens around 2K, 2 kilohertz, is a change in directivity from the tweeter, which sends its sound out in all directions, to a mid-range or a woofer, which on its high frequency side, right where it's crossing over, it tends to send the sound kind of straight out towards the user. So what that means is when we're measuring in your listening positions, we're measuring, although we might measure the same level, the same ultimate level of those frequencies from the tweeter versus those frequencies from the woofer, the ones that are coming directly at you are perceived as more powerful, and the ones that are kind of spread around the room are not necessarily. So, say hi to
My
my cat.
black cat is over here too. He hasn't bugged me
Um,
yet.
so uh, that's where mid-range compensation comes in. And with the curve editor, you have the ability to design your own mid-range compensation. So if you decide that maybe your crossover is a little bit different frequency, you might want to tweak that up or down so you can disable mid-range compensation that we provide
Mhm,
and add in sort of your own tweaks and adjustments that might suit your speakers better. Maybe your tweeter is pushed a little lower, 1800 hertz.
mhm,
Maybe you have horns versus the cones and domes of a kind of conventional speaker.
mhm.
We find that this works well on all of those, but sometimes something a little different works better.
Yeah. So it's based on science. It's a reason. There's a method to the madness. So they didn't just put a dip in there just because. It's because, like you
Right.
said, you're going from a wide dispersion, little driver, to a driver that does not have a lot of dispersion in its higher frequencies or its higher range, and that
Yeah.
causes some wonkiness. And helps you get rid of that. You can always turn it off. It sounds like honky.
Yeah. So that's the that is the symptom of something that needs a little mid-range compensation, is something that sounds like it's got kind of a
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
the
And
coming
and
through a megaphone.
and I have a very good set of speakers, and I still actually, like on my main calibration, I've played it with it on and with it off, and I prefer it on. That's my preference. Someone else can fight with me about how dare you put mid-range compensation on your Wilson audio speakers? Don't you know they're perfect or whatever, or they sound great, or how could you put that on your Schmeckman 95, whatever.
They
So
may have, and they may have something like that built into the power response from the factory that we don't want to undo with EQ.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
so
So everything has the ability, like I said, if you look at the menu, to turn it on and turn it off. So for example, what he was just talking about is I can go in and we say I could turn the mid-range compensation just on the fronts, the centers, the rears, whichever ones I want to do. I can I can go, and then also he was talking about the curve editor, where I can actually go in here and I can make my own curves if I want to. Now, could be like giving a baby a shotgun. I'm sorry, that's a little brat. Giving them, but because you can hurt yourself dramatically and your sound quality dramatically, because we're scared that people are going to go in here and do the old-fashioned when they had a graphic EQ. I want a graphic EQ, and then they all go whoop,
yep,
you
smiley face. You know,
smiley faces.
the interesting thing about the smiley face on the graphic EQ is I think in a lot of cases it was sort of a crutch for not having dynamic EQ. Dynamic EQ
Exactly.
gives you a little bit of a smiley face for you, but only when you need it.
Exactly, exactly. And yeah, so people would go in here and you can go in here and if you want to tweak this thing, you can see I can put points all over this thing to make adjustments. So I can actually go in and make any adjustment that I would want. Oh, let me get rid of that because that's not good. So I can go in and you can make your own editor. The next thing that we want to talk about is the range, frequency range. So I can actually go in here and I can limit where I want this to work. Because a lot of times people say, man, I really my high frequencies and my mid range are beautiful. Most of the time, the biggest problems people have is how the bass bouncing around in the room, and that's the place where it has the most problems. So you can go in here and use this frequency range, and you can say I only want Audyssey to work until up to fill in the blank frequency. So right now I have it set to 348, or I can set it to 255. I can set it wherever I want, and then the Audyssey will only work on that region of the signal if that's what only you want to do. And Jim asked a great question last time, and we're going to ask it again here about you were asking where. Remember that, Jim? The question you asked about
Oh
where?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of theories depending on who you talk to, and I don't talk to room correction engineers. I talk to speaker engineers,
Hmm.
um, because we own a couple of speaker companies,
Hmm.
and they seem to all have a little slightly different feeling about what my high point on the fix below this should be.
Hmm.
I've heard 100, I've heard 150, I've heard 200, I've heard 300, I've heard 350. And I know that there's no right answer, right? But do you have something that might help guide people a little bit or give them some kind of idea where they should start?
Well, in this case, you're talking to the room acoustics or the room EQ
He's like,
engineer,
do it
and
all. Do it
I
all.
say have all the EQ. You know, it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt. And you know, with a curve editor, you can dial in whatever it is you want. So we'll smooth out the spectrum, and we'll give you something smooth. So regardless, I like to do the whole thing. The
Yeah.
theories out there that the room dominates below the kind of the frequency where the direct and reverberant sound balance out. So the sound becomes the ratio of the reverberant sound, the sound that's reflecting off of walls and ceilings and floors, versus the sound that's arriving direct from the speaker. That varies by frequency. And so at some point, the power level of those two types of sound cross over each other. So I think one prevailing theory is to set it around that point.
Mhm.
But unless you know what that point is, it's not necessarily, and it's kind of a tricky thing to determine. Then it's completely different in every room. So there's definitely no one right answer. I think I don't
Yeah.
think anybody can tell you. You know, they might look at your room and give you an estimate of where they think it is, and people who are very good at doing that, but I say EQ it all because
Yeah.
speakers aren't perfect, rooms are never perfect, and it doesn't do any harm. So if you what it is if you like the character and the tone and the just the feel of your speakers at those higher frequencies and you don't want to mess with it, then that's your opportunity to do it. And I would say you just want to give it a try different frequencies, and vary it an octave at a time. Go 100, 200, 400, 800 even, and see how you like it.
Yeah, and what I was doing, looking at my room. So I IQ'd this yesterday, and if you look, you can see that where there's issues up to a big dips and peaks, and they start to kind of mellow out a little bit as I started to get into that 200 to 200 200 to 300 hertz range in my room. One thing that's noticed is that shows you how effective this is. The front left speaker, if you look at that curve, that's actually in the room closer to the away from the door. The right front speaker is located closer to a opening, and that opening sends sound out of this room into my big family living room, dining room, kitchen area. And you could see, if you look at it, the characteristics of the two EQ settings are different. I mean, you can literally see a difference there, and the system actually recognized that and made corrections for that. So in the end result is the same, even though the starting point was completely different. And you can kind of look at this and say, well, based on how much work it has to do at the bottom, maybe this is where I want to stop. And you can play with it. I mean, it's not a guarantee, but it does kind of give you an indication of what's going on in your particular space and what needs to be worked on. And what range needs to be worked on. And my bass is crazy because this room is above my garage, which makes bass a boom, which is why you get these massive peaks at like 60, So yeah, so you can use that as a solution as well. So, and then of course, we talked about the range, and lastly, we talk about this is where you can go in and make those additional settings, and it describes what's going on for the dynamic EQ, the dynamic volume, and the low frequency containment. Once everything is done, I can opt to upload it. I can opt to send it to a receiver. And then when I select send it to a receiver, I have 3 receivers in my house. It'll say, what receiver do you want to send this to? And then I can send it to that receiver. I have multiple, like I said, I have multiple versions of this, and I can have multiple versions. I've done this where I've actually loaded into the receiver, saved it to a USB, and then loaded the second version into the receiver and save that to a USB, and I can label them, and I can when I go from daytime to nighttime on my AV8805, I can switch between the 2 different Audyssey configurations. Now, we have a much easier solution now. Before, I had to manually load those. On the new receivers we're introducing, they have what's called dual speaker preset. So what I can do is I can do that screen down, curtains closed, nighttime calibration, and I could save it as preset number 1. And then I can do another Audyssey calibration for curtains open, daytime, and save it as preset number 2. Or I could do something like possibly do a sweet spot setting that's really optimized for just me. I do my Audyssey, I make any adjustments, so I am comfortable with it for it to be the best for me. And then I could do another one that is optimized specifically for the entire family, so they get a wider sweet spot. Now, I have a receiver here, a AV. I have a 6700 right here, and if you notice, if I scroll down to speakers, that's where my Audyssey calibration is for setup. But if I go into manual setup, I can go in and make adjustments to the Audyssey calibration. And if you look down here, you'll see that it has speaker preset. And right above next to the Denon logo, you'll see it says speaker preset number 1, speaker preset number 2. I can make all my adjustments, save it under preset number 1. And then I can make all the adjustments again and set it under preset number 2. And I would just basically, I can switch here, or I can utilize the 4 buttons on the remote control. There's those 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons on the remote. I can program it there. I can also, there's also a discrete code. So I have a control system. So when I watch movie, it will not only do all the stuff that I need to do, but also switch Audyssey calibrations just from the touch of a single button if you have a control system. So you can have optimized Audyssey performance for 2 different scenarios, which I think is really, really cool. And you can control it from, like I said, you can go into the menu and change it. You can change it from the option menu. You can use the smart select buttons. You can program it there, or you can use it as an IR, IP, or RS-232 control on your receiver. So that's really cool.
There's something I wanted to address in those 2 last slides. There's one that was talking about your sweet spot versus everybody, and then there was the other one with the couch in the measurement positions. There we go.
This one? Okay.
Don't do that. Don't do what's in that diagram. Don't measure the floor. Don't measure the floor. Don't measure the floor behind the couch.
Oh yeah. That's true. Don't measure the floor. You know,
and unless you sit on the floor. If you sit on the floor, measure the floor. But and always get that microphone up to ear level. So, and I can sit up and I can like be looking at Breaking Bad and going, what's going on? Or I can lean back and I'm just, you know, super loungy on the couch, right? So those are the kind of positions I want to measure. So if I'm doing a sweet spot for me, it's going to be this sphere, like me kind of sitting up, me kind of like more relaxed, and then me totally slouched over. That's my sweet spot, because I listen, you know, how I feel, how I sit down, that would be, and I can come up with 8 positions in this little sphere easy.
Yeah.
And I will do that. I'll measure 8 positions in this little area if I want my sweet spot.
Yeah, so those 8 pictures you see are 8 places to put your tripod. Don't put the microphone on the ground. It's a indication of you should put your tripod in these general locations, not on the ground. The microphone to be where your ears are. Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Phil? That's what. So you start reading from the left, at least in the U.S. where we live, and then you go to the right. And that's showing you where the microphone needs to be.
Exactly. I notice it says ear level.
Or the seat cushions, right?
Yeah.
You're tuning the room for your behind or your feet.
Yes, exactly. Unless your head is up your over there.
Yeah.
So EQ at ear level. You're not EQing the bass for your butt. Okay. So put the microphone at ear level.
So even if you think you want one position, measure all around that position, because when the microphone measures, if you just leave it in one position and measure that one position 8 times, you will not get good results. You just will not. Your ear there's one here and there's one over here. You got at least 2 positions, and then your head, like you said before, your head's not in a vise.
Yep.
So you know, you move around. So measure more positions, and if you want to measure the whole couch, measure up, measure down, different people, different heights, sit in different places. We want to move that mic around.
There's also one more thing I want to talk about. We talk about this baseline thing, and that baseline is applied on top of, that is used as the baseline for your DTS-X, your DTS-X Pro, your Dolby Atmos, and all your other surround sound formats like Aural 3D. Now, there is another format that uses that baseline and then sprinkles a little special sauce on top, and that is IMAX Enhanced. I'm not going to go through and talk about all the benefits of IMAX Enhanced. I just did a whole section on IMAX Enhanced with the DTS guys, and if you want to know about every single detail about it, we can cover it there. But the main thing to remember about IMAX is the speaker locations are different, and the size of the speakers are gigantic, and they run in and the mix is different. One thing about the mix is, because the speakers are so big and every single channel has its own subwoofer. It's a 7.0.5 system. they run very little dynamic compression. So it can go from a very quiet scene to something insane in the middle of a movie. And that's part of the impact of going to an IMAX movie. When you're trying to bring that home and make sure that your little speaker system can handle that madness, it does require some additional bass management and equalization. Because the regular near field mix that you get in the movie theater, that you get on the disc, normally they don't. Most other releases do not give you the actual cinematic mix. They do what's called a near field mix. They go back into the studio, and the mixing engineer mixes it in a smaller room with less dynamics, because that's what to make sure that he doesn't blow up somebody's sound bar or their regular speaker system. The IMAX mix is uncompressed. It's the theater release. Okay, so now I have to take that and make sure that I do some protection to make sure that you do not damage your stuff. So what ends up happening is there is a whole nother setting or menu settings for IMAX that I want to actually show you. So what I have here is my menu for my Marantz AV8805. And right now I'm playing Media PC. So I can basically look at the TV over here, and I can see what you guys are seeing to make sure that I'm on the right thing. But if I go into the audio section here, you will see that if I hit surround parameter, there's not a lot of stuff going on. There isn't, because right now I'm just looking at my PC. Now, if I go back here and I switch to my Blu-ray player, my Blu-ray player right now is looping a IMAX enhanced video. And when I click on here, you'll see that now under surround parameters, there's actual settings for IMAX. You don't see the IMAX settings unless you're playing IMAX content, because you don't need to see the settings because you're not playing IMAX content. So if you want to get into these settings, you can go in and make the adjustments here. So if I go to IMAX, I have a couple of options, auto or off. If I switch it to off, the base layer of IMAX Enhanced is DTSX or DTSX Pro. If I switch it to off, it will just play it back using the standard DTSX Pro settings, and it will not apply to any of the base management or level adjustments or all the other things that they do for IMAX. If I turn it to auto, it will. Now, in order to protect your speakers, IMAX Enhanced has defaulted crossover settings at 70. But people say, well, I have a pair of BP towers and they can play lower. So if I go to IMAX settings, audio settings, and I click it to manual, you will see that now you have adjustments for your high pass, your low pass filter, and your subwoofers here. So I can actually make adjustments. So people ask me, where are these IMAX settings? They are only available when you are actually playing IMAX content, because you don't need to see them if you're not playing IMAX content. So I will say, so it's a baseline, and then so think of IMAX like since we're doing beer analogies, I guess it would be Audyssey makes the pure water, DTSX makes the beer, and then IMAX throws a shot of whiskey in it, or something like that to enhance the experience. So it's kind of a cool thing. So I wanted to point that out. The other thing too is that we always bring up is it comes with a little microphone, and people go, well, I could buy a better microphone. Right now it's designed to work with that microphone, but the characteristics of that microphone is actually built into the system. So it knows how that microphone reacts. So even though may not be a reference microphone, the system knows the pros and cons of that microphone, so it can take that into account. And because that mic is always used, and we are much better at fixing any peaks and dips in that.
Not only that, every single one of those microphones has gone through a test chamber that has a $10,000 reference microphone, and it has been proven to match close enough to that reference microphone, well, close enough to our correction curve. So they don't have a flat, perfect response by themselves, but they adhere to a correctable curve very well.
While we're on the topic, and this is a question from Ashish Mahindra, while we're on the topic of enclosed microphones, I'm not sure if he means included microphone, are they capable of measuring a calibrated flat response all the way down to 20 Hertz?
Definitely, yeah, and below. Low frequencies are actually pretty easy with microphones. The microphones don't have an inherent physical problem, so it's actually the high frequencies, and it can measure out to 24 kilohertz as well.
I am actually going to let Jeff go because we are 45 minutes over, Jeff. And thank you for being very receptive to this group of very inquisitive people. So,
So Jeff, what did you think?
I'm glad to be here. I enjoyed it. It's great to see people's questions, and it's great to have an opportunity to share some of the behind the scenes and some of the reasons for the way things are.
all Jeff wants to show you is there's a reason why there's a mid-range compensation. There's a reason why there's a roll-off. There's a reason why the volumes are set lower. There's a reason for there's a method to the madness, and you can determine whether or not you want to utilize their 50 something years of this or make the adjustments yourself. So that's it, but that's all up to you. If you guys like these, tell your friends to actually subscribe. I always say that to the YouTube channel. As always, I'd like to thank my team behind the cameras that are Frederick, William, Jim, Jennifer. So take care, everybody. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Jim, again. And we shall see you soon.